Richard Roberts here. Yeah, I know I hadn't said it in a while. You might have forgotten who I am. And here we are with adventure number 2 of the adventures of Hairbreadth Harry. From C.W. Kahles' famous comic strip, as it says here. A few different cast members in this one, and a new director, who I don't believe we've seen before. The first one is actually, that we saw, Sign Them Papers, is actually credited to Edward Ludwig. I'm not sure that's actually an accurate credit, because it isn't in the titles, but Al Herman, very busy comedy professional of the 20s. More on him in a bit. But we're going to see, like I said, a change in at least one of the main cast members. The beautiful Belinda, this time played by another actress, Charlotte Merriam. Now, Charlotte Merriam was not an unknown name to the comedy companies of the 1920s, and actually had a pretty decent career. Came into pictures at Universal around 1919, working with the then very popular comedy team of Eddie Lyons and Lee Moran. Seemed to get some attention working with them. Found herself the following year, 1920, working for comedy producer Al Christie, and also working for a comedy director named Reggie Morris, who formed a company called Special Pictures Corporation. Was producing comedies with a lot of the Christie cast. She appears in some of both his special pictures and the speed comedies that he produced for Arrow Distributing. She also worked with the infamous Henry Lehrman, who had been a director at Senate and producer-director of the LKO Sunshine. She appears in some of his independent comedies produced for First National in 1921, including Wet and Warmer, which survives, and it's a very wild, strange comedy that she's very funny in. But she, here's John J. Jack Richardson back again. By the way, this is kind of interesting, before we get back to Charlotte Merriam. The grounds you're seeing here are, believe it or not, the grounds of the Beverly Hills Hotel in Beverly Hills, which was built in 1912. You can see the hotel in the background of at least one shot coming up, and it is interesting to, a nice location, one that is used from time to time in films, but not too often for comedies, certainly not on this budget. But for some reason it seemed to work. Ties in nicely with the Hawaiian music thing. Hawaiian music was a very popular craze in the late 20s. And again, we see some nice locations here. But anyway, Charlotte Merriam had a pretty good acting career. By this point, like 22, 23, she's working in some major features like Maurice Tournier's The Brass Bottle, Frank Borzage, or Borzaghi, take your pick. I've never figured out which was which. The Nth Commandment from 24. Probably the biggest part she ever had was in the first film version of The Magnificent Ambersons, which was a Vitagraph production from 1925 called Pampered Youth. But she plays Anne Baxter's part, the part of Lucy Morgan. Anne Baxter, of course, playing in the Orson Welles version later on. And that's probably her most famous highest level role. Unfortunately, for some reason, it didn't pan out into a major career after that, and she found herself back working in 2 real comedies again. First for Al Christie, then for the Weiss brothers. She plays the beautiful Belinda in a number of Hairbreadth Harry shorts. Unfortunately, it was kind of downhill from there. Minor supporting roles in some early talkies. You can see her in Night Nurse. Mostly, she plays a showgirl in Fox's Broadway Bad with Joan Blondell and Ginger Rogers. She pretty much gave up her movie career about 1934. Got married, settled down. There's the Beverly Hills Hotel right there in the background. And Charlotte Merriam passed away in 1972. But again, she actually is one of the better Belindas, and I think she does a good job in this, and a very attractive woman. And but getting back to Al Herman, like I said, again, one of the busiest comedy directors and writers of the 20s. Started, like I said, first as a writer at Fox, got his first directing gig in doing some of the Fox Sunshines. continued as a writer and director at Universal. He was hired by Universal soon after that and stayed with them directing the Century comedies for the Stern brothers through most of the early 20s. I think about 5 years he was there, and very successfully. Then left Universal in 25, found himself freelancing for some of the independent comedy companies. He directed some of the Samuel Bischoff Gold Medal comedies, which featured both Jack Cooper and Jack Richardson here in the same film. You had both Relentless Rudolphs working together. He also directed some comedies for the Bray Company. That was a cartoon company. Did cartoons like Farmer Alfalfa, one of the earliest cartoon companies, but they were producing live-action comedy shorts in the mid-20s, not too successfully, but he directed some of those. He then was also working for producer Larry Darmore, directing the very young Mickey Rooney in the Mickey Maguire comedies, which really became his bread and butter. He directed a bunch of those into the early 30s. He was also directing some of the Joe Rock Ton of Fun comedies, the infamous Ton of Fun comedies with the three fatties. So again, he was very busy and turned out literally 100 or more shorts in the 1920s. Once the Maguire series started to peter out in the early 30s, he moved to B Westerns and serials. He directed one of the great mascot serials with Bela Lugosi, The Whispering Shadow. He even worked again for the Weiss brothers a few times, directed their film version of The Drunkard, directed 3 of their serials that Louis Weiss produced in the 30s, The Black Coin, and The Amazing Exploits of the Clutching Hand. I'm sorry, he only directed 2, not 3. Made an error there, get over it. And again, continued directing B Westerns for Monogram, for PRC, into the 40s. Directed one of the great bad PRC B films, Miss V from Moscow, 1942. Continued to work with PRC and the other B movie companies like Eagle Lion, all the way through the 40s, mid-40s, late 40s. Became working more as production manager, got into television. He was one of the directors of The Cisco Kid, along with Les Goodwin, the other Weiss brother director. So again, not a name that many auteurists will bandy about, but a good, successful director. And he does a fine job with this Hairbreadth Harry comedy. Now, as I was saying before I was interrupted by the ending of the last one, talking about the contracts. The Weiss brothers, again, were producing these things with $4,000 picture loans from Consolidated Film Industries. And basically, after they had produced 8 pictures and delivered them to the Weiss brothers, they renegotiated the contract, saying that really they couldn't produce a quality product for $4,000. So the Weiss brothers secured an additional $1,000 per picture loan supplied by Mr. A. Cossack from New York, who was getting a $200 charge back per $1,000 he was loaning, with 6% interest accrued after 6 months. It says loan shark to me, but anyway, a nice, tidy return on the loan. But that really didn't seem to satisfy either the Wests or the Weiss brothers, and they basically, after producing 6 pictures in each series, delivering 18 total, they, by mutual agreement, the Weisses and the Wests decided to not produce anymore until those pictures had been sold, and agreed to terminate the contract. That's a letter in the files dated July 15th of 1926. Now, obviously, the Hairbreadth Harrys and the Winnie Winkles and the Iz and Lizzie series were getting some sort of play, because, again, the Weisses get back to the West brothers at the beginning of 1927, renegotiate a second contract for another season. Again, they're back to the $4,000 per picture, but Consolidated Industries is not supplying the money this time. The Weisses are. And this contract is again for 18 pictures, 6 Winnie Winkies, 6 Winnie Winkles, 6 Hairbreadth Harrys, and 6 Izzy and Lizzies. And the Wests delivered on those pictures, but apparently no more after that. And there was a disagreement basically between the Weisses and the Wests, or the Weisses and the Weisbergs, since West's real name was Weisberg. And apparently, at some point in the late 20s, the West brothers defaulted on the loan the Weiss brothers had made to them. There's a letter in the files to Hollywood agent Leo Morrison, dated June 16, 1932, regarding the rights to the Winnie Winkle pictures, which he's wanting to purchase back for the comic strip artist Martin Branner. And Louis Weiss, in this letter to Morrison, says, and I quote, "You have nothing to worry about where the West brothers are concerned, as they cannot make any claims. They owe me about $13,000 in notes, which they have defaulted, so there is nothing to worry about on that end." So, the West brothers must have run into some financial difficulties. However, it didn't seem to stop Billy West in 1950 for hiring an attorney who sent a letter dated October 4th, 1950 to Louis Weiss demanding royalty payments on the West Brothers shorts that the Weisses had been distributing to television for about 3 years there. Oh, this is a fun little sequence. We got a mummy, rather cheap-looking mummy, chasing Earl McCarthy around. There's no response in the files, but obviously it didn't come to a lawsuit. But interestingly enough, Billy West was also in 1950 suing Paramount Pictures over the fact that they had used stock footage from a film Billy West had appeared in 1934, directed by Frank Capra, called Broadway Bill. Frank Capra had Paramount buy Broadway Bill from Columbia and used a lot of his stock footage in the remake that Paramount made of the picture called Riding High with Bing Crosby in 1950, and Billy West appears as stock footage in the remake and didn't get paid for it. So West was suing them over using his footage again without any sort of remuneration, which was settled out of court. So, but Billy West continued to work in the Hollywood industry for a number of years. He was directing comedies at Fox in 2728 after producing these pictures for the Weisses, continued to work as a gag man and an occasional actor, and was trying to still make a living in the business. Finally, though, gave it up in his later years. He owned and operated a restaurant called the Columbia Grill, which was across from the old Columbia Picture Studios at Sunset and Gower. And several historians, including Calton Lehue and Sam Gill, interviewed him in his later years. He passed away in 1975. But he didn't really have much to say about the Weiss brothers at that point. One wonders why, but certainly he had a long career as a comic, successful Chaplin impersonator, of course, and producer of some quality comedy product like the Hairbreadth Harry series. Unfortunately, here we're going to get some unfortunate racial humor, but I hate to say that was pretty much a standard with comedies at the time. Fortunately, this is actually a black actor. It's not a white actor in blackface, but I think we're going to be treated to the standard complement of racial gags of this type. Whoops, we've got the skeleton. And I think, in a minute, we will get the either the swelling Adam's apple, which was a popular one, or the bugging out eyeballs. We apologize. These are historical artifacts. But I guess we can look at them. Oh, there's the Adam's apple. And hope we've come a bit farther these days. But, I think we're going to get Feats Do Yo Stuff. And boy. Yep, and yes, the bugging out eyeballs. Oh, well. Sorry, folks. Unfortunately, that was the majority of the work that black actors could get in Hollywood at the time. But, like I said, the one thing you can say about these, as Weiss Brother product goes, this is a step above. like I said, $4,000 or $5,000 for a short is nothing compared to the $15,000 to say $40,000 Max Senator Hal Roach might spend on a short. But like I said, the Weisses were producing whole features for $5,000, and yeah, this is an elaborate set. We have a pretty decent safe set here, a fake safe, and some pretty wild gags, as we're going to see in the third Hairbreadth Harry coming up, which is actually one that was produced by the Weisses after the West brothers had pulled out. The budgets drop considerably, and it becomes a much simpler picture. Relentless Rudolph has a few less henchmen, and the sets are a lot less complicated. But that's unfortunately the nature of the low-budget business. But again, we'll be seeing another Relentless Rudolph. In fact, we'll see a completely different cast. Earl McCarthy will be gone. So it's sad. Earl McCarthy passed away in 1933 of an apparent heart attack when he was 27 years old. I don't know much more of the story on that, but definitely way too young to be dying of a heart attack. And again, his career had sort of petered out. It was just down to supporting roles, tiny supporting roles in B films, again, college pictures, and that sort of thing. Now, it looks here like, I don't know about that, that's a stuntman. But at least in the tight shot, that was Jack Richardson hanging off what was, I'm sure, actually the balcony. They may have had a mattress or two close, but he's definitely, these aren't specially made sets on tops of buildings. These are just buildings that they're hanging off of. Again, the credit to a lot of these comic performers. They would go out and hang off buildings like that, and hang off the Pacific Palisades and injure their lives or injure themselves and threaten their lives. And there were definitely injuries, not necessarily serious ones, broken bones, and definitely bruises. Well, that was a dummy, nicely cut into Mr. Richardson at the bottom, at least. And that's always the running gag, is seeing Relentless Rudolph go curses time and time again. But it looks like once again Hairbreadth Harry has pretty much saved the day. Relentless Rudolph will always return. Hope you enjoyed it.